So everybody, wonderful to see you all here. It's quite sort of strange and a little bit overwhelming, and a little bit sort of uncertain of exactly what I'm doing, to be perfectly honest. But the subject of my talk is uncertainty, so that might be quite fitting. This is our first virtual Thursday night talk that we've ever done. You know, we've done, it's nearly 10 years of once a week talks that we've been having at Mountain Cloud, and but this is the first one that's virtual, and it is a little strange. I got to tell you, I'm sitting in, you know, my study at home, and I would swing the camera around and show you, but it's just too untidy. I'm not going to do that. And this is, but next to me is this lovely, two things. A lovely card I was given this morning, which I don't know if this is going to work, but it's a Finnish card with these characters from the Moomin Troll books. I don't know if any of you know the Moomin Troll books. I don't think they were quite as big in America as they were in Europe, but they're really wonderful. And I was obsessed with them as a kid. And I got given this card this morning, and it was very, very exciting, actually. It happens to be a very nicely made and nicely drawn and printed card. And by the way, is this okay? Are you hearing? Is this working? Yeah, okay. There's enough thumbs there that I think something's going on. But next to the card is this beautiful Jizo Buddha Bodhisattva that I was given, I think it's now about 11 years ago, actually. And by somebody who was gravely ill, who I was going to see in a hospice project I was involved in. And you know, Jizo Bodhisattva has this particular relationship with infants and with mothers grieving lost children. And somehow I feel the spirit of my teachers here with this little statue and little effigy. That, you know, has been with me. I probably wouldn't have a statue like it, really. Maybe now and then I've had a tiny little Buddha, but nothing the size of this. I mean, he's small, but he's not that small. And I wouldn't have it had he not been given to me. And I feel very grateful to the friend who did give him to me, because he's been a wonderful companion in some strange way that I would not really have been open to having that kind of companion, given my sort of a philosophical bent. But actually I take comfort from this Jizo Bodhisattva here. He's carrying one of these staffs. I don't know how easily you can see this. These staffs, it's obviously it's a wooden replica, these staves that have rings on them that Zen practitioners used to carry around in China and Japan, and they'd tap the ground with them as they walked. You know, so that animals, little creatures would hear them coming and feel the vibrations in the earth and get out of the way and not get stepped on. And Jizo is a sort of real, I don't know, supporter, collaborator, ambassador or something of the other great figure of love in the Buddhist tradition, Kanzeon or Kuan Yin or Kannon, these sort of, you know, a kind of archetypal representation of mercy. So I'm going to talk I've got to just tell you again, it is a little bit strange doing this like this, you know, because I'm in my home and we've got both our sons are back and they're both really tall. They're much taller than either my wife or me. And they eat the quantities of food that I mean, the shopping we do for a week that's gone the next afternoon, you know, again and again. It's like having two sort of newly adult leopards in the house, you know, that just devour quantities that you can't really believe. But of course, it's lovely to have them, and one of them, his wonderful girlfriend's here as well. So, and our house is not that big, so having these very tall young men and you know, very sort of fit, and they're always they love working out. So you can't really go into a room without somebody who's doing pull-ups in the doorway or yoga on the floor or somewhere. There's sort of dumbbells all around the house. You know, it's all quite strange in the house anyway. But now to be trying to sit in my little corner of the house and actually offer a tea show, which is all an extremely strange thing for me to be doing, and it's very unfamiliar. But and the house that I'm in is already unfamiliar anyway. I mean, it's lovely, but it's very unusual. So I don't know how this is going to work. We'll just have to sort of see and hope for the best. But all of you, I assume, are actually in somewhat similar circumstances, at least in the sense that you're basically at home way more than you would ordinarily be, for reasons that we all know. Of course, there's a lot of uncertainty in the air and around us and in the world at this moment. And it's actually, I think it's fair to say it's sort of global. You know, it's really something that the whole world is really united in. I mean, the whole human world is actually experiencing this, you know, this coronavirus outbreak together. I mean, it's really quite new, isn't it, to have, I mean, I know there was the Spanish flu in 1918, 1919, but I mean, the scale of global communication back then just wasn't anything like what we have now. And so there's a remarkable sense, it seems to me, of the whole world going through something together. I mean, I'm not sure there's a corner of the world right now, well, maybe there are some remote corners that aren't in this similar kind of uncertainty, unease, fear, and hardship that we're seeing here in Santa Fe, and you guys in Germany and California and Texas and South Bend and wherever else you are. You know, it's and how remarkable actually that this is really, hard as it is, it seems to be an extraordinary instance of global unity. I mean, maybe I'm being starry-eyed about it, but I think I feel that. And that's quite remarkable. So maybe we are all actually united in a condition of uncertainty right now. It manifests differently, for sure. For some, you know, I have friends who just, their job's gone and they don't know when it will come back or if it will come back and how they're going to make ends meet. And, you know, there are others who can probably ride it out, but it's still extremely disruptive to our sense of stability and the sort of order of things. And all of us are facing, you know, the possibility that we might get it, of course. Some of us may have it, and we don't know whether we'll be among the ones who have relatively mild symptoms or very severe symptoms, and we don't know if we'll be among the ones who don't make it through, you know. And it's not only the older folks who succumb, you know, it's younger people also who are dying of it. And so it's a very of course it's a challenging situation, but there's something remarkable going on as well in the global experience of it. It's really have you been hearing me? Yeah, okay. Because I just got a message that I've been unmuted by the host, which suggested that all this time I'd been muted. But but it's okay. It is. It's. I mean, okay. I'm seeing thumbs. Okay, great. So okay. Now, the subject that that I said I'd talk about is uncertainty, because I know we all know it's very pertinent to right now. But the point is this, is it really only pertinent now? I mean, it's up now. We're aware of it now. But are we right to only be aware of it now? See what I mean? We normally live, don't we, with a complacent sense that, death is down the road. I know it's, if I'm more than, 25 years old or something, I do, or maybe, I don't know, maybe I have to be 40 years old, but somewhere along in early to middle adulthood, it comes home that this is mortal, this is finite, this will end. But, it's kind of usually at some sort of comfortable distance, whether that's 6 months or 6 years or something, it's down the road. And all of us will know that that's a misconception, because we'll have known, I imagine pretty well all of us will have known people who didn't die at what we would today think of as a sort of reasonable, sort of normal lifespan. We'll all know people who died younger than that. And, the great, it's deep in Buddhism, and it's deep in our reality that the only certain thing is death, and time of death is uncertain. It is uncertain. This life is intrinsically uncertain. It is floating on an ocean of uncertainty. Our every step is taken on instability. Life is fragile. It's snuffed out in an instant when we least expect it. This is one of the compelling forces for practice. When Buddha left the palace as a young man, he had realized, he'd had the so-called 4 encounters. He'd seen the old person, sick person, and the dead person. And it had come home to him that he was going to be those things. He was going to end up a corpse. I am going to not be here. This total experience, and all its forms and its manifestations, all its memories, all its hopes, all its various kinds of experience that we have that we call my life, it is going to stop. And I don't know when. It's rare that we have an idea when. I mean, we often have an idea when, but it's rare that we have a real idea when. I think there are times when, somebody is very sick, when a person who is experienced at, say, a hospice worker working with people who are going to die, who are unwell, may get a sense of how long it's going to be, you know. In fact, I had that experience myself. I was, when my dad was grievously ill in towards the end of his life, I was visiting him in Oxford, England, and I called back to a dear friend, Glenys, who's runs Coming Home Connection, which is a hospice care group here in Santa Fe that I'd done some work for years back, helping out there with them. And I just called Glenys, and she, you know, she's a close friend, was just chatting a little bit about my dad's situation. And she said, well, just, you know, sort of describe him a little bit. So I started sort of telling her how he looked and some of his sort of symptoms and so on, and his setup in the house. And she said, oh, Henry, it's about 6 weeks. And I just heard her say that, and I kind of believed she knew just from the few details I'd given her. And she was right to the day. He did die 6 weeks later. And, you know, he had a mercifully easy death. He wasn't afraid of death really by the end. And he said, we just go out like a light bulb. The light goes off. You know, that was he was a diehard atheist, you know, to the end. And perfectly at ease with that. He had a long, rich life and so on. But usually we don't know. You know, for most of us, we don't know. We assume we do, however. That's the problem. You know, that because we assume, we kid ourselves that we're not living in uncertainty. And then something comes along like this virus outbreak, and we're forced to recognize uncertainty. And, you know, for most of us, it goes straight into fear and anxiety. You know, typically we go to a place of, we get anxious, and that is in, you know, Buddhist terms or in mindfulness terms, we might say it's a condition of contraction. You know, if you check it out, you'll find that basically anxiety, fear are a contraction in the heart. You know, the heart area literally sort of tightens a little bit. You can feel it. And what do we do about that? How does practice help? How does this Zen view of things help? Well, first of all, you know, as we cultivate mindfulness, a loving awareness of the here and now, just as it is, as we develop the capacity to love what is going on here and now, which is basically how I understand mindfulness. Of course, that would include developing the capacity to love sensations in the body. They're a key part of our inner experience. We call them emotions, typically. They're a key part of our ongoing experience of being alive as humans with very lively, tender, sensitive hearts on the whole. Especially, you know, nice people who do things like practice Buddhism and, you know, tend to be sensitive and a little more keen to be aware and thoughtful and kind and responsive in positive ways. So we have to be responsive in positive ways to what's going on in here, in the chest, in the heart. And in there, if we're anxious, we find contraction. And our task as practitioners is to not reject that, not resist it. Because if we do, we're only putting more contraction on that contraction. So what we do instead is find out what it will take to welcome it sincerely, wholeheartedly. In other words, as I see it, basically to love it. To have this uncomfortable sensation, for example, anxiety, and to love it. It's a shift in sort of perspective. It's a shift in, stance. It takes letting go of something we think we know. We think we know. I mean, I'm sorry, talking about you as if I know, and I might be wrong. And so you could say, well, speak for yourself, Henrik. So, okay, I would tend to think I know that I would jump to an assumption that this sensation is not a good thing because it's unpleasant. I sort of think I know this is sort of not a good thing. I would like it to be gone. So learning to love it requires my giving that up. It requires my opening to uncertainty, not being certain that this sensation is bad or undesirable. Instead, letting go of my certainty around it. Then I can open up to loving it. And if I can love it, of course it stops being a problem. And if it stops being a problem, I have opened up to a non-contracted state. I've opened up my heart, essentially, to warmth, to fluidity, tenderness. And that can sort of envelop the contraction. The contraction becomes a little smaller. The contraction is contained by something bigger that is loving. And we all have this capacity. Jizo sitting next to me is an emblem of that, of the capacity to love even when things are difficult. So let me just sort of triangulate this a little bit. We've got uncertainty. We've got anxiety, fear, challenging situation. We've also got releasing knowing, opening to not knowing, and how that can open us to something like love. And if it does, our orientation to our situation changes. It can change rather dramatically. Something that seems clearly sort of bad, maybe with this kind of letting go of certainty, opening to not knowing, letting the heart sort of take its place in our life. Maybe there we find that we don't know what is good and bad. I mean, don't take this ethically, but in another level, we don't know what are good events. We don't know what are bad events. And when we're prepared to open in that way, problems change so much. They stop being problems. Okay, so that's, I mean, I know there's a whole lot more to be said, but that's on the level of developing mindful, loving awareness, let me say. If we're going deeper in practice, if we're drawn to deeper practice, we can start to find that, for example, those of you who have stumbled by some chance into Zen in a sort of serious way, and you're maybe sitting even with a koan or multiple koans, you've done koans, you'll realize that, there is a path of beyond opening to loving awareness. There's actually a path of what we call awakening. And that's actually, from my point of view, a path into even deeper love. It's a path that shows us, that can reveal to us in really unexpected ways, that our sense of who we are, our sense of identifying as being this sort of person with this name, with this biography, and this body, this mind, with this history and memories and so on, actually is not the sum of who I really am. That identity is very provisional. It's very partial. It's another kind of contraction around a view of who I am, who we are. It's another form of pseudo certainty, of kind of sort of self-induced certainty, to bring a sense of sort of false security, I'm afraid to say, because it's another thing that is just not the certain thing it seems to be. It's another thing that, if deeply investigated, if we have the sort of inclination to investigate that, and we have a practice that supports investigating it, we have perhaps a little bit of guidance and support along the way of investigating it, especially if we've got the good fortune to be open to tumbling into a great ancient tradition that has been doing this for thousands of years, for this very, we can come upon, the famous sudden awakening of East Asian Buddhism, and of course of South Asian Buddhism as well. Awakening is pretty much always sudden, actually. Even in early Pali canon, you hear stories of sudden awakenings. Buddha himself, in the various forms of his awakening story, it's a sudden thing. It's from one moment to the next. There's a tipping from one way of things being into a totally different way, a release from the certainty of knowing who I am, letting that go, and it is the great journey of a lifetime, really, because it's the, in Socratic terms, we're talking about the unexamined life isn't worth living. Well, the deep examination of life is to come to know thyself, as Plato or Socrates said. Know thyself. Find out, who we really are. And that, again, is only done by releasing, letting go of the apparent knowledge of who I am. I can't find out as long as I'm sure I know, if you see what I mean, if that makes sense. As long as I'm sure I know, well, I'm confined by my certainty and my sureness of that knowledge. But to be presented with the possibility, which we are presented with in every moment, actually, of releasing that knowing, just letting it go. I mean, it's scary because it's uncertainty. How do we sort of ease ourselves closer to uncertainty and not shrink back, contract back from it? We're being presented right now with a global invitation to do that. It's not something, normally, we can just roll through life or hustle and bustle through life and not really need to face that if we don't want to. We can keep ourselves busy enough and sort of distracted enough. quite easy to do this. But of course, with iPhones have made it a whole lot easier, you know. But now we kind of have to look at it. We're in a global situation that is saying, please look at this. Please look at it. Because, you know, so what happens when we do, if we can find the support of practice that allows us to fall back a little bit more into uncertainty, into not knowing, we can discover that there is actually some intrinsic human way of letting go of our identifying process, releasing from identifying, stopping identifying, and simply casting ourselves upon we don't know what, of actually releasing into we just don't know what. That's the key thing. As long as we know, we're sort of not doing it. It's when we release into we don't know what. And it's here now. You know, the not just the invitation that I was talking about in terms of the global virus crisis, but the reality actually of every moment is that it's an arising. Every moment is something is arising in this form, as it is, this moment, just as it is. But if we just sort of fall back a little bit into the not knowing, we find that we really don't know what's going on. I mean, we can name things and say it's this, it's this, it's this, but that's such a small part of it. The underlying, like, what this is that's arising. It's you know, it's boundless. This very moment, it's confined by the four walls of the room you're in, is boundless. Your very body, confined by your skin, is actually boundless. Simply has, you know, the only apparent boundary of your skin. And so I don't know whether I'm conveying this very well, but let me just sort of conclude this particular thought by this sort of little nugget I wanted to convey to you, that by going through the you know, the invitation, the portal, what the tradition calls the Dharma gate of uncertainty, of releasing knowing. What happens if we tumble through it, if we pass through it, if we release all that we think we know? We don't find, you know, some kind of bleakness that we may have thought we were protecting ourselves against with all our knowing, our contracting into knowing. Instead, we find a most sort of really, of course, indescribable boundlessness that includes everything and also includes nothing, and yet is not a fearful void at all, not at all. Far from it. If we really sort of do this sort of big release, what we find is actually a universal, just a sort of pervasive, universal experience of love. That's what is really waiting for us on the other side of letting go. So it's that's what, produced. I'm sure that experience is sort of, it's sort of a fact. It's not, probably rather hard at this point to prove scientifically, but I'm sure they'll get there. I'm quite sure they will, because, it's sort of intrinsic to the creation of matter. I don't know if it's got anything to do with the Higgs boson or something. Maybe it hasn't, but it's somehow intrinsic in matter, in form emerging, in appearances emerging. That act of infinite creativity and generosity, that's what we sort of fall into the source of, if we pursue the quest of a deep practice. So I'm sure it's because of that emblematic, iconic, archetypal figures like Kuan Yin and Kanzeon sort of emerged, because people wanted to have some sort of way of representing this sort of infinite benevolence that they'd found. But, and then you get religious interpretations of that. But I mean, I think originally, truly, deeply today, you don't have to have a religious take on it. I think it's a matter of personal exploration into our humanness. It's a deeply human fact. This is not a, personally, how I take it, it's not a, I think it'd be in line with Zen really as well. It's not some otherworldly thing. It's intrinsic to this very moment. So, okay, so let me just conclude, because it's time for me to conclude, but to sort of see if you've got some sense of this. What I'm really trying to say is that if we open to uncertainty rather than contract away from it, if we move toward it, if we move into a condition where we don't need to know, if we open into our unknowing, our non-knowing, our not knowing, instead of finding something fearful, instead we sort of find the opposite. We find something that feels like boundless love. And I am somehow sure, I mean, this is, what I've just described is actually the process, pretty much, of working with any koan. That's the journey that any koan can take us on. So, in conclusion, as a Zen guy, let me say that we are facing a kind of global koan right now. And what that means to me is not some sort of scary enigma, which sometimes koans can seem like, actually. It doesn't mean that. It means some opportunity for being opened up by pressing matter, being, heart opened, having a heart opened by something that it would already ordinarily be resisting. That's what a koan. See, koans are so difficult; they make no sense, and our natural response to them is somehow sort of pull away, shrink back, resist. That's part of their job, because once we've done that resisting thing, they can work with us. They can work with our resistance. They can work with our contraction, and sort of somehow teach us that there's another way, and that other way is releasing all that we think we know, and finding that that's a journey, it's a pathway into deeper love than we could ever have imagined. Which personally, I sort of feel is a kind of intrinsic property of our universe. And that's a big statement I'm sure that many would scowl at if they heard this, but something like that. Okay, wow, okay, well, you know, I don't know whether this is any help, but I'm going to wind up now, and I sort of, I really do feel that I want to convey that it's possible to go from contraction and fear and anxiety, which is totally understandable, if we approach it the right way, which I was trying to convey with this sort of, you know, starting with just mindful awareness that becomes more loving awareness of what is difficult in us, that will melt our hearts. And then moving, for those that are so inclined or curious, you know, into the deeper questions of sort of, well, what really, you know, what really is going on here? What is this? I mean, you know, because from my point of view, the virus is actually a facet, a manifestation of Kuan Yin. You know, because in my worldview, if I have one, I suppose I don't really, but sometimes I do. And when I do, I feel that all things are manifestations of boundless, empty compassion, boundless, compassionate emptiness. You know, this emptiness is infinitely compassionate, and it's all things. And it can't not be. And I think somehow, you know, we are cherished beings just like all others. And it wants somehow our possibility of being really filled with sort of love, you know, which we could call true happiness, you know, is sort of wanted. And it's possible. And I somehow feel these circumstances are pushing us in that direction more than perhaps we might usually be pushed. Okay, so that's Henry's little take. And I hope it's something by way of encouragement or something, you know, beneficial that I offer these words. You know, I hope there's some help in it, in doing so. It's a part of the Zen tradition. Teachers give talks, you know. I really hope it's a helpful part, at least this evening, you know. I hope it's some help. And I want to just say again how marvelous it is to see all of you. I wish I could say hello to everybody. And there's quite a lot of people I don't know. So thank you for joining this. And all the people that I do know, thank you to everybody. And what did I see? Did I see someone in England? I saw a couple of people in Germany. I've been trying not to kind of scroll through because I wanted to concentrate on, you know, just sort of not be too distracted while talking. But I'm now scrolling through a little bit more. It's very lovely to see everybody. Thank you. Actually, it's very nice to see Mountain Cloud Zendo. Yeah, I can see Dan and Matt and bowing in the beautiful Zendo. I mean, this is our beautiful Zendo, of course, right here now. But there's also Mountain Cloud right there. It's great.